My mother-in-law pointed a manicured finger at me from the gallery. She is faking it. My husband smirked, adjusting his expensive tie. She pulls this stunt every time things do not go her way. The judge looked down at me from the bench, her expression hardening with annoyance. Then my legs gave out. A military doctor burst through the heavy oak doors, shoving past the bailiff. "Your Honor, she needs help." Just 1 minute later, he screamed, "Call 911 immediately." Everyone in the courtroom froze, until the judge suddenly stood up. "My name is Lauren, and I am 33 years old. I work as a senior forensic accountant for the Department of Defense. I am the person they call to track down missing millions in classified military budgets, yet I could not see the brutal betrayal happening inside my own home." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against a toxic family who systematically tried to destroy you. I gripped the wooden witness stand inside the county courthouse, my knuckles turning white. My vision kept blurring dark spots swimming across the oak paneling. Across the room sat Gavin, my husband of 4 years. At 35, he was a wealth manager who sold real estate portfolios and was convinced he was the smartest man in the room. He sat beside his attorney completely unbothered that he was attempting to steal everything I had worked for. Behind him sat his mother, Barbara, clutching a handbag with absolute triumph on her face. Gavin's attorney paced like a shark, his voice echoing loudly. "Let us review the facts, Lauren. You are asking the court to deny my client equity in the primary residence. You claim because you purchased the house with your premarital savings, it belongs solely to you. Yet over the last 6 months, your behavior has been completely erratic. You have taken unexplained absences from your vital government job. You wander your house at all hours. You exhibit severe paranoia and emotional outbursts. You are completely unstable. Gavin had to put his lucrative career on hold to manage your steep mental decline. He deserves full ownership of the property to offset the massive financial burden you caused him." I tried to speak, but my tongue felt like solid lead. The strange numbness creeping up my fingertips for weeks was now spreading rapidly through my body, paralyzing my vocal cords. I opened my mouth, but only a raspy wheeze came out. I looked directly at Gavin. He was shaking his head, performing the role of the exhausted husband to absolute perfection. He whispered to his lawyer, a manufactured sigh escaping. Barbara leaned forward aggressively from the front row. She did not even try to hide her contempt for me. "She is faking it," she announced loudly, pointing at my trembling hands. "She pulls this stunt every time things do not go her way. She just wants attention." The judge struck her gavel sharply. "Order in the court. Mrs. Reed, please answer the question. Are you capable of managing your own affairs? Or are you purposely stalling these proceedings to punish your husband?" I wanted to scream that I was fine, that Gavin was the one destroying our lives, but a sudden pain shot directly behind my eyes. The entire room tilted violently. The arrogant sneer on Gavin's face warped and twisted as my legs simply gave out beneath me. I collapsed, hitting the hard wooden floor of the witness box with a sickening thud. The severe impact knocked the last bit of oxygen from my lungs. Lauren, Gavin shouted, his voice thick with fake panic as he quickly stood up from his chair. "Oh my God, she is having another one of her episodes. Someone help her immediately." He took a calculated step toward me, but before he could reach the wooden gate, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. A tall man in a military uniform shoved past the protesting bailiff, his boots striking the floor with absolute authority. It was Dr. Nathaniel Reed, the chief medical officer for my department. He was 45 years old, a hardened veteran who tolerated zero nonsense from anyone. "Stop right there," Dr. Reed commanded, pointing a rigid, unyielding finger at Gavin. "Do not touch her." Gavin froze in his tracks, his theatrical performance momentarily derailed by the sudden intrusion. "Excuse me, who the hell are you?" "That is my wife, and she is having a mental breakdown." Dr. Reed ignored him completely. He vaulted over the wooden partition and dropped heavily to his knees beside my shaking body. He ripped open his medical bag, his hands moving with frantic precision. He checked my pulse, flashed a penlight into my unresponsive eyes, and noted the severe tremors racking my muscles. "Your Honor, Gavin's lawyer objected loudly. This is highly irregular. We are in the middle of a hearing regarding my client's assets. This woman is having a panic attack, and this man has no jurisdiction here. Dr. Reed did not even look up from his rapid medical assessment. He shoved Gavin back hard as my husband tried to lean over the partition. I said, "Keep your hands off her." Dr. Reed snapped, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. You have done enough damage. He turned his attention directly to the bench. Your Honor, she needs help immediately. This is not a panic attack. She is dying. The courtroom erupted into chaotic whispers. Barbara stood up, clutching her pearls, her face draining of color. Gavin took a step back, his arrogant smirk entirely wiped from his face. He looked at the doctor, then at me, a flash of genuine terror crossing his features for the first time. Call 911 immediately! Dr. Reed screamed, his voice booming powerfully over the rising chaos. Do it now! The bailiff scrambled frantically for his radio. The judge stood up so fast her heavy leather chair crashed loudly against the wooden wall behind her. The entire room descended into pandemonium. As the emergency sirens began to wail loudly in the distance, echoing through the busy streets outside, my vision finally faded to pitch black. The cold floor slipped away, and the darkness pulled me under. But to understand exactly how I ended up fighting for my life on the floor of a divorce court, you have to understand the trap that had been set for me exactly 6 months earlier. Gavin lunged forward from his seat at the plaintiff table. His face instantly shifted into a mask of pure, exaggerated panic. He threw his hands out, playing the role of the devoted, terrified husband for the judge and the gallery. Lauren. Oh my God, Lauren, honey, I am here. He rushed toward the witness box, reaching his arms down to grab her by the shoulders. He intended to haul her up to take physical control of her body, just as he had taken control of her entire life over the past year. Dr. Reed did not even hesitate. Operating on pure military instinct, the chief medical officer stepped between Gavin and Lauren's seizing body. With a sharp, practiced motion, Dr. Reed shoved Gavin backward. The force of the push sent Gavin stumbling awkwardly across the floor until his expensive Italian leather shoes caught on the carpet, causing him to crash heavily against the wooden table. Keep your hands off her, Dr. Reed barked, his voice carrying the lethal authority of a commanding officer in a war zone. You have done enough. Gavin's lawyer jumped to his feet, his face red with indignation. Your Honor, I demand this man be arrested for assault. My client's wife is clearly having a severe psychotic break, and this unhinged stranger is physically preventing a husband from comforting his own wife. From the front row of the gallery, Barbara leapt out of her seat. She clutched her designer handbag to her chest, her shrill voice cutting through the chaotic murmurs of the courtroom. Arrest him immediately. That man is a lunatic. Gavin is her legal next of kin. He has the absolute right to take her to our private psychiatric facility right now. She belongs in our care. The judge hammered her gavel repeatedly against the sound block, the sharp cracks echoing like gunshots. Order. I will have order in my courtroom this instant. Bailiff, secure the doors. She pointed her gavel directly at Dr. Reed, who was already back on his knees, pressing a stethoscope against Lauren's chest. Sir, you have exactly 10 seconds to identify yourself and explain why you are interfering with a court proceeding, or you will be spending the night in a holding cell. Before Dr. Reed could answer, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open again. 2 paramedics charged down the center aisle, pushing a wheeled stretcher. Dr. Reed immediately began rattling off clinical data with rapid-fire precision. Female, 33 years old. Heart rate is plummeting to dangerous levels. She is exhibiting classic signs of severe neurotoxic shock. Her central nervous system is actively crashing. I need an IV line started immediately and prepare a heavy metal counteragent for transport. The paramedics did not question him. They moved with rehearsed speed, lifting Lauren's limp body onto the stretcher and strapping her down. Lauren's vision swam in and out of focus. She could feel the rough canvas of the stretcher straps biting into her arms. She could hear the panicked shouts of her husband and the authoritative commands of the doctor, but the sounds felt like they were coming from underwater. A cold plastic oxygen mask was clamped firmly over her nose and mouth, forcing air into her failing lungs. Gavin scrambled upright, straightening his tailored jacket, trying desperately to regain control of the narrative. You cannot take her. I am her medical proxy. I refuse treatment at a civilian hospital. I am authorizing a transfer to a private wellness center. Stop touching my wife. Dr. Reed stood up to his full height. He turned his back to the paramedics, allowing them to secure Lauren, and faced Gavin directly. The doctor reached into his tactical medical bag and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. Across the front of the envelope was a bright red, unmistakable stamp from the United States Department of Defense. He walked straight to the judge's bench and slammed the heavy file down onto the polished wood. The resounding slap silenced every single person in the room. I am Dr. Nathaniel Reed, Chief Medical Officer for the Department of Defense. He announced, his voice echoing with absolute finality. Lauren Reed is an active government asset with an elite security clearance. That file contains her official military toxicology report, authorized and verified by federal laboratories. He turned his head just enough to lock eyes with Gavin. Gavin's arrogant posture instantly deflated. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a very expensive suit. She is not suffering from bipolar disorder, paranoia, or any other convenient psychiatric label her husband has tried to paste on her today to steal her assets. Dr. Reed continued, his gaze never leaving Gavin. She is suffering from late-stage lethal heavy metal poisoning. This is not a divorce hearing, Your Honor. This is an active crime scene, and you are looking at an ongoing attempted homicide. A collective gasp went up from the gallery. The judge stared at the classified file, her eyes wide with shock. Gavin's lawyer actually took a physical step away from his own client, realizing the massive legal crater he had just stepped into. In the background, Barbara tried to quietly inch her way toward the gallery exit, her eyes darting nervously around the room, but the bailiff had already moved to block the heavy oak doors, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. Get her to the secure transport, Dr. Reed ordered the paramedics. They wheeled the stretcher rapidly down the center aisle. Lauren stared up at the high, ornate ceilings of the courtroom as they passed beneath them. The heavy doors swung open, pushing them out into the bright, blinding afternoon sunlight. The sudden shift in light made Lauren squeeze her eyes shut. She felt the jolt of the stretcher being lifted and locked into the back of the waiting ambulance. Dr. Reed climbed in right beside her, slamming the heavy rear doors shut, sealing out the chaos of the courthouse steps. He grabbed a blood pressure cuff and immediately strapped it to her arm, his face a mask of intense concentration. Stay with me, Lauren, he ordered, his voice breaking through the thick fog in her brain. You fought too hard to give up now. We have them. Just keep breathing. Lauren tried to nod, but her chin barely moved. The ambulance engine roared to life with a deep vibrating rumble that shook the floorboards beneath her stretcher. Then the sirens began to scream. The deafening, high-pitched wail filled the confined space of the ambulance, echoing off the metal walls. The sound was piercing, overwhelming all her other senses. As the ambulance tore through the city streets, the screeching sirens seemed to stretch and warp in Lauren's fading consciousness. The noise morphed from a mechanical alarm into something else entirely. The wail transformed into the sharp, persistent whistle of a stovetop tea kettle boiling over. Her eyes slid shut. The sterile white ceiling of the ambulance faded away, replaced by the warm amber lighting of her own kitchen. She was pulled backward through time, dragged back into the trap they had so carefully constructed. The piercing whistle of the kettle filled her ears, taking her straight back to Thanksgiving Day exactly 6 months earlier. The shrill whistle of the kettle sliced through the heavy scent of roasted turkey and sage stuffing. I stood in the center of my own formal dining room, gripping a stack of fine china plates so tightly my knuckles ached. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over me, tilting the expensive hardwood floor beneath my feet. I blinked hard, trying to banish the gray static crowding the edges of my vision. It was Thanksgiving Day, but the atmosphere inside our Beacon Hill home was anything but grateful. Leave the plates! Lauren, my mother-in-law Barbara, commanded from her seat at the head of the table. You are moving too slowly anyway. You look completely washed out. I forced my spine straight, fighting the strange, heavy fatigue that had been creeping into my bones all afternoon. I am just a little tired, Barbara. I have been cooking since 6 this morning. Barbara scoffed, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive Chardonnay. Please, you are tired because you insist on keeping that pedestrian government job. Crunching numbers for the Department of Defense is hardly a career, Lauren. It is a charity mission. You should be supporting Gavin. My son closes million-dollar real estate deals before breakfast. He needs a wife who can manage a household, not a glorified desk clerk who comes home exhausted every night. I bit my tongue, tasting copper. The house we were sitting in, the very chairs they were occupying, were paid for entirely by my premarital savings. Gavin's wealth management career was flashy, but my high-level security clearance and forensic accounting salary provided the actual financial foundation of our lives. But stating facts in this house was always treated as an act of war. Vanessa, Gavin's younger sister, chimed in, swirling the ice in her crystal cocktail glass. Mom is right, Lauren. You are always so stressed out and high-strung. Maybe if you quit stressing over other people's taxes, your body could actually do what it is supposed to do. She offered a sickeningly sweet, entirely fake smile. You know, give my brother an heir. Time is ticking, and you are not getting any younger. The cruelty of the remark felt like a physical slap across the face. They knew perfectly well that Gavin and I had struggled with starting a family for years. They weaponized that private pain at every single holiday gathering. I swayed slightly, my grip on the porcelain plates slipping as my hands began to tremble uncontrollably. Before the china could crash to the floor, large, steady hands reached out and took the heavy stack from me. I looked up and saw Andre, Vanessa's husband. Andre was a brilliant, self-made, independent auditor, but in this room, he was treated worse than the hired help. Because he was an African-American man from a working-class neighborhood, Barbara and Vanessa constantly belittled his independent firm, referring to his hard-earned business as a cute little hustle. I have got these, Lauren. Andre said, his voice a low, calming rumble amidst the toxic chatter. Why do you not sit down? You are burning up. Vanessa snapped her fingers from the dining table. Andre, stop playing busboy and bring out the rest of the wine, and make sure it is the vintage Dad bought, not that cheap stuff you brought from your neighborhood. Andre's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek, but he maintained his absolute composure. He gave me a brief, knowing look of solidarity before heading toward the kitchen. He was a forensic auditor by trade, a man trained to see the discrepancies everyone else missed. I knew he saw exactly how this family operated, and I knew he hated it just as much as I did. Gavin suddenly pushed his chair back and stood up, playing the role of the devoted peacemaker for his audience. Now, ladies, let us not gang up on my wife. She has had a long day. He walked over to me, wrapping a heavy arm around my shoulders. His cologne was suffocatingly strong. You do look terrible, babe. You are shaking like a leaf. I tried to pull away, feeling a sudden, intense wave of nausea rising in my throat. I just need some water. Nonsense, Gavin said, guiding me forcefully toward the kitchen island. I have exactly what you need. I was just brewing it. He reached over the granite counter and handed me a steaming ceramic mug. The dark liquid inside smelled earthy, masking something sharp and distinctly metallic underneath. What is this? I asked, staring down at the murky surface. It is an imported herbal tea, Gavin insisted, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. My client from Europe brought it over. It is specifically blended to reduce stress and balance the nervous system. You need to relax, Lauren. You are making everyone tense. Drink it, Barbara called out from the dining room, her voice dripping with disdain. If she refuses to drink it, Gavin, just let her suffer. You coddle her too much. I did not have the energy to fight them both. My limbs felt heavy, filled with wet sand, and the room was spinning faster now. Wanting nothing more than to end the confrontation and escape upstairs to bed, I raised the mug to my lips. I took a long, steady swallow. The liquid was thick. It burned the back of my throat with a bitter, ashen aftertaste that made my stomach churn violently. Good girl, Gavin murmured softly, patting my back. Drink it all. I set the half-empty mug down on the counter. Almost instantly, a violent shudder ripped through my body. The dull ache in my joints flared into a sharp, piercing agony. The edges of the kitchen cabinets blurred the straight lines, turning wavy and distorted. I gripped the edge of the island, my breathing turning shallow and ragged. My skin suddenly felt like it was on fire, yet my hands were ice cold. I looked up, trying to focus my failing vision on my husband. Gavin was standing a few feet away, leaning against the archway that connected the kitchen to the dining room. He was not looking at me. He was looking directly at his mother. Through the gray haze taking over my sight, I saw it. It was a micro-expression, a fleeting but undeniable exchange. Gavin gave Barbara a slow, deliberate nod. Barbara met his gaze, her lips curling into a tight, chillingly dead-eyed smile of pure understanding. There was no warmth in that look. There was no familial affection. It was the look of two predators watching a steel trap snap shut on their prey. I tried to speak, to ask what they had just given me, but my vocal cords completely seized. The room pitched sideways. From the shadows of the pantry, entirely unnoticed by Gavin and Barbara, Andre stood frozen. He held a bottle of wine in his hand, his sharp eyes darting from Gavin to Barbara, and finally to the half-empty mug of tea resting on the counter. I saw his posture stiffen, his auditor instincts flaring to life. He had seen the exchange. He had witnessed the silent, deadly communication between mother and son. The darkness rushed up to meet me, swallowing the warm light of the kitchen. My knees buckled, sending me crashing against the side of the island. The last thing I heard before the world went completely silent was Gavin's voice, perfectly pitched in a tone of manufactured panic, calling out for help to an audience he had already fooled. I woke up in my own bed, the heavy linen comforter pulled tightly to my chin. The bright morning sunlight stabbing through the bedroom window felt like shattered glass against my eyes. My skull throbbed with a dull, relentless rhythm. Gavin was sitting on the edge of the mattress, his face arranged in a perfect mask of husbandly concern. He stroked my damp forehead, telling me I had fainted from exhaustion. He said the civilian doctor he called to the house diagnosed me with a severe panic attack and chronic fatigue. I wanted to argue, to tell him about the burning agony in my stomach right before I passed out, but my tongue felt swollen and useless. That morning was the beginning of my descent into a living nightmare. Over the next 3 weeks, my health deteriorated with terrifying speed. It started with a deep, persistent ache in my joints. My knees and elbows felt like they were filled with crushed glass. Then came the tremors. I would sit at my home office desk trying to log into my Department of Defense secure portal, but my hands would shake so violently I could not even type my password. The most devastating blow came a few days later. I stood in the shower watching in absolute horror as thick, dark clumps of my hair slid down my shoulders and swirled down the drain. I sank to the wet porcelain floor, sobbing uncontrollably, as my body seemed to disintegrate from the inside out. Gavin played the ultimate doting husband whenever our neighbors or his friends came around. He would hold my hand, fetch my water, and look at me with tragic, sympathetic eyes. But the moment the front door closed, his demeanor shifted into something cold and calculating. When I showed him the bald patches on my scalp and begged him to take me to a specialist, he let out a heavy, patronizing sigh. He sat me down on the couch and held my trembling hands, looking at me with manufactured pity. "Lauren, you have to face reality," Gavin said, his voice smooth and hypnotic. "This is not a physical disease. You are losing your mind. The doctors warned us that extreme stress could trigger a psychotic break. You are pulling your own hair out in your sleep. I have watched you do it." I stared at him in complete shock. I told him he was lying, that I had never pulled my own hair out, that my body was failing. He simply shook his head, pulling out his phone to show me a web article about early-onset dementia and severe bipolar disorder. He told me I was becoming a danger to myself. He insisted I take an indefinite medical leave from the Department of Defense. When I refused, he confiscated my work laptop and my car keys, claiming I was in no mental state to drive or handle classified government financial data. He was systematically cutting me off from the outside world, isolating me inside the very house I had purchased with my own hard-earned money. Then the walls closed in completely. 2 days later, the doorbell rang and Gavin ushered his mother inside. Barbara stood in my foyer with 3 large suitcases, announcing cheerfully that she had moved in to care for her sick, helpless daughter-in-law. I was stripped of my last remaining shreds of independence. I was confined to the guest bedroom on the first floor because my legs were too weak to navigate the stairs. Barbara took absolute control of the household. She controlled what television programs I watched, who was allowed to visit, and most importantly, she controlled every single thing I consumed. 3 times a day, Barbara would bring me a tray of heavily seasoned soup or a dark, bitter smoothie. She stood over me with a hard, unblinking stare, refusing to leave the room until I swallowed every last drop. She also introduced a new regimen of imported vitamins that she claimed would fix my brain chemistry. After every meal, the burning sensation in my stomach intensified. My vision would blur and a heavy, unnatural fog would pull me into a deep, dreamless sleep. I was a prisoner in my own home, slowly being erased by the people who claimed to love me. But my mind, trained to detect anomalies and track missing data, refused to completely shut down. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I woke up feeling slightly more lucid than usual. Barbara had left my bedroom door slightly ajar. I could hear the television playing loudly in the living room, masking the sound of my movements. I forced my shaking legs over the side of the bed. Using the wall for support, I crept quietly down the hallway toward the kitchen, desperate for a glass of clean, unadulterated tap water. As I neared the kitchen archway, I saw Barbara standing by the trash can. She was ripping a thick envelope into tiny pieces, a look of focused determination on her face. She shoved the shredded paper deep into the garbage, buried it under some empty food cartons, and walked out the back door to the patio. My heart hammered against my ribs. I dragged myself to the trash can and dug through the coffee grounds and eggshells until my trembling fingers found the shredded pieces of heavy cardstock. I pulled them out and laid them on the granite counter, piecing them together like a puzzle. The logo of my primary bank stared back at me. It was a formal approval notice for a massive home equity loan. $500,000 had been borrowed against my house. The funds had been transferred to an account I did not recognize. I never applied for a loan. I never signed these documents. A surge of pure adrenaline sliced through the toxic fog in my brain. I shoved the torn papers into the pocket of my sweatpants just as the front door unlocked. Gavin walked in, loosening his tie, looking incredibly pleased with himself. I stepped out of the kitchen, demanding answers. I confronted him about the loan, about the missing money, about the fact that he was draining the equity from my home behind my back. Gavin did not panic. He did not yell. He simply looked at me with chilling, absolute detachment. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. He kept his eyes locked on mine as he spoke into the receiver. "Yes, Dr. Miller," Gavin said, his voice dripping with fake desperation. "It is Gavin Reed. I need you to come to the house immediately. My wife has completely lost her grip on reality. She is experiencing severe paranoid delusions and hallucinating financial documents that do not exist. Please hurry. I think she is becoming dangerous." He hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me, towering over my frail, trembling frame. "You really should not have gotten out of bed, Lauren," he whispered, his eyes dark and empty. "Your mind is playing terrible tricks on you. We are going to have to get you the professional psychiatric help you desperately need." I stood there, clutching the shredded bank notice in my pocket, realizing with absolute horror that my husband was not just stealing my money. He was carefully, methodically building a legal case to lock me away in a psychiatric facility forever. Dr. Miller arrived within 30 minutes. Gavin orchestrated the entire performance flawlessly. The doctor, my husband's golf buddy, barely looked at me before prescribing heavy sedatives and agreeing with Gavin's assessment of severe paranoia. I realized in that terrifying instant that screaming the truth would only tighten the snare. I loosened my grip on the shredded bank notice hidden inside my pocket and forced my face into a mask of confused compliance. I apologized. I wept fake tears. I swallowed the pills Gavin handed me, secretly hiding them under my tongue to spit out later. Survival meant playing the broken wife until I could find a way out. 2 agonizing weeks passed. My physical deterioration continued, but my mind grew sharper with every pill I faked swallowing. Gavin, eager to display his martyrdom to an audience, orchestrated a mandatory family gathering at our house. He wanted to parade his frail, unstable wife in front of everyone to solidify his narrative. Vanessa arrived with Andre in tow. The moment they stepped into the formal living room, the toxic dynamic resumed. I sat confined to a velvet armchair, a blanket draped over my trembling legs, watching the psychological warfare unfold. Gavin poured himself a glass of bourbon, leaning arrogantly against the marble fireplace. He turned his attention to Andre, who was helping Vanessa with her coat. So Gavin sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "How is that little neighborhood hustle of yours going, still crunching receipts for small grocery stores? You know, if you ever want to step up to the big leagues, I could probably get you an entry-level spot at my firm. Of course, you would have to lose the cheap suits and learn how real wealth operates." Vanessa giggled, sipping her champagne, unbothered by her brother's blatant disrespect toward her husband. Andre stood perfectly still. He was a highly successful forensic auditor, a man who built his firm from the ground up, but Gavin could never look past his working-class background and race. Gavin preferred to view him as a street-level hustler rather than a financial equal. Andre did not take the bait. He simply adjusted his cuffs and met Gavin's arrogant stare with icy composure. "My firm is doing exceptionally well, Gavin. We prefer independent clients. It keeps the audits clean and the money traceable. I like to know exactly where every single dollar originates." A muscle twitched in Gavin's jaw. The subtle threat in Andre's words was undeniable. Before Gavin could retaliate, Barbara swept into the living room carrying a silver tray. "It is time for Lauren's special tea," she announced, her voice overly loud and theatrical. "She needs her rest. Gavin, be a dear and fetch the imported honey from the high cabinet. My hands are full." Gavin set his bourbon down and headed for the kitchen. Barbara placed the silver tray on the side table near my chair. Two steaming ceramic mugs sat on the polished metal. She turned to answer a question from Vanessa, distracted by a tale about a country club renovation. Andre moved with silent, breathtaking speed. He stepped smoothly past the side table, positioning his broad shoulders to block Barbara's line of sight. In one fluid motion, Andre reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an identical ceramic mug filled with clear, steaming liquid. He swapped it instantly with the metallic-smelling tea Barbara had prepared for me. He slid the toxic brew onto a nearby bookshelf, hiding it behind a large potted fern. He then picked up the clean mug and turned toward me, his expression entirely unreadable. I watched this impossible sleight of hand with wide eyes. Andre knelt beside my armchair, holding out the warm mug. "Here is your tea, Lauren," he said, his voice loud enough for the room to hear. "You need to stay hydrated." As he handed me the ceramic cup, he leaned in close. His large hand brushed against the deep pocket of my cardigan. I felt the heavy weight of a solid object slide into the fabric, followed by the crisp rustle of folded paper. "Drink it," he mouthed, his eyes boring into mine with absolute urgency. "It is just water." I raised the mug to my lips and took a long, trembling swallow. The liquid was hot and entirely tasteless. It was the first pure thing I had consumed in weeks. A wave of profound relief washed over me. Barbara turned back around, her eyes immediately darting to the mug in my hands. "Good girl," she cooed, her fake smile returning. "Drink every drop. We want you getting better." I drained the cup, performing the role of the obedient patient. Andre stood up and walked back to his wife, his posture rigid and alert. The gathering dragged on for another excruciating hour. Gavin boasted about his latest real estate acquisitions, oblivious that his carefully constructed prison had just been breached. Barbara watched me intently, waiting for the familiar heavy fog of the toxins to pull me under. I feigned exhaustion, letting my eyelids droop and my head loll against the back of the armchair. When Gavin finally carried me upstairs to the guest bedroom, I lay perfectly still under the covers until I heard the lock click from the outside. They were trapping me in for the night. I waited 10 agonizing minutes, listening to their muffled laughter echoing from the first floor. Then, moving with a frantic energy, I threw off the heavy blankets and reached into my cardigan pocket. I pulled out a phone. Beneath it was a small square of thick white paper. I unfolded the note, holding it up to the pale moonlight filtering through the blinds. The handwriting was sharp and precise. "I saw Barbara putting liquid drops in your food," the note read. "Gavin is hiding massive offshore accounts. I tracked the home equity loan. Do not eat or drink anything they give you. Call me immediately. We have a plan." The digital clock on the bedside table flipped to 2 in the morning, casting a faint red glow across the guest room. I lay perfectly still beneath the heavy quilt, listening to the rhythmic silence of the house. Upstairs, Gavin and Barbara were asleep, confident that their toxic regimen had securely chained me to this mattress. They severely underestimated the adrenaline spike of sheer survival. I slipped Andre's burner phone from my pocket and powered it on. The screen illuminated my trembling fingers. I bypassed my contacts, opened the rideshare application, and requested a car to a street corner 2 blocks away, ensuring Gavin would not hear a loud vehicle pull up. The ETA was 8 minutes. I slid my feet into my sneakers, grabbed my heavy winter coat, and moved to the door. The lock clicked with a loud snap, but no footsteps echoed from the floor above. I crept down the hallway, avoiding the floorboard that always creaked, and slipped into the garage. The air was freezing, biting through my thin sweatpants, but the cold sharpened my senses. I manually disengaged the side door, slipping out into the damp, freezing night. The icy wind whipped my thinning hair against my face as I sprinted down the driveway, my weak legs burning with every step. When I reached the designated corner, the black sedan was already waiting. I climbed into the back seat, locking the doors immediately. The driver asked if I was heading to the local emergency room. I shook my head, instructing him to take the highway out of the city. Going to a civilian hospital was completely out of the question. Gavin was a wealthy, connected man with friends in high places, including the private psychiatrist he had already brought into our home. If I checked into a standard emergency room, my medical records would be instantly accessible. Gavin would use his status as my proxy to intercept the tests, frame my midnight escape as a severe manic episode, and have me legally committed before sunrise. I needed a fortress. I needed the one place his money and influence could absolutely never penetrate. I directed the driver to the heavily fortified gates of the Department of Defense Regional Medical Annex. As a senior forensic accountant handling classified military budgets, my security clearance was significantly higher than most military personnel. We pulled up to the main checkpoint, the harsh floodlights illuminating the armed guards. I rolled down the window and handed my federal identification badge to the sentry. He scanned the barcode, his eyes widening slightly as my clearance level flashed on his screen. He immediately waved the car through the barricades. I thanked the driver, stepped out into the secure compound, and walked directly into the subterranean medical wing. The sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors were quiet at this hour. I approached the night duty desk and specifically asked for Dr. Nathaniel Reed. As the chief medical officer, he was intimately familiar with my file and strictly bound by military confidentiality protocols. Dr. Reed emerged from his office 10 minutes later, his combat boots echoing sharply on the linoleum. He was a hardened veteran who possessed zero tolerance for bureaucratic nonsense. When he saw me shivering in a chair, clutching my winter coat around my frail frame, his professional stoicism cracked. He immediately ushered me into a secure examination room, locking the heavy door behind us. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I handed him the burner phone and Andre's handwritten note, watching his jaw tighten as he read the warning. I detailed every symptom meticulously. I described the agonizing joint pain, the sudden and terrifying hair loss, the severe muscle tremors, the burning nausea, and the suffocating mental fog that descended every time Barbara forced me to consume her special meals and imported teas. Dr. Reed's expression grew dangerously dark. He did not suggest I was stressed. He did not ask if I was experiencing a bipolar episode. He immediately recognized the systematic destruction of a human body. He grabbed a tray of vials and tied a tourniquet around my bruised arm. "We are running this entirely off the grid," he stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. as he drew vial after vial of my blood. Your husband will not find a single trace of this visit in any civilian database. I am processing a comprehensive heavy metals panel through our internal classified laboratory. I will hide you in our secure officer housing until the results come back. You are not stepping foot back in that house. I spent the next 3 days isolated on the base, drinking nothing but purified water and eating sealed military rations. Without Barbara's toxic meals, the heavy fog in my brain slowly began to lift, replaced by a cold, burning rage. 4 days later, Dr. Reed walked into my room holding a red-stamped file. His face was grim. He sat down opposite me and placed the laboratory results on the metal table. "You are not crazy, Lauren," he said. "You are being murdered." He opened the file, pointing to a highlighted chemical marker. "You tested positive for massive, lethal concentrations of thallium. It is a highly toxic heavy metal. It is odorless, tasteless, and dissolves instantly. Your husband and mother-in-law have been microdosing you for months, building up the toxicity levels in your central nervous system to mimic the exact symptoms of a severe degenerative neurological disease. The imported herbal tea, the special soups, the perfectly timed, concerned glances. It was all a meticulously planned execution. How much time did I have?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dr. Reed closed the folder, his eyes locking onto mine with chilling certainty. "Given the saturation levels in your bone marrow, if you had stayed in that house and consumed their food for 1 more month, your heart would have completely stopped. You would have died of a seemingly natural cardiac arrest, and your husband would have inherited absolutely everything." I returned to the house just before the sun crested the horizon, slipping back through the side garage door with the silent precision of a ghost. The cold air clung to my clothes, but the freezing terror in my veins was far more profound. I crept into the first-floor guest bedroom, sliding under the heavy duvet, just as the floorboards upstairs began to groan. Gavin was awake. The performance had to begin. When Barbara pushed open my bedroom door an hour later, carrying a silver tray, bearing a steaming bowl of oatmeal, and a mug of her imported herbal tea, I gave her exactly what she expected to see. I let my hands shake violently against the mattress. I kept my eyes dull and unfocused, slurring my morning greeting. She smiled, a terrifyingly warm expression that sent a fresh wave of nausea crashing into my stomach. "Eat up, Lauren," Barbara cooed, setting the tray on my lap. "You need your strength. The doctor said your mind is playing tricks on you because your body is so weak." I nodded submissively, gripping the spoon with feigned difficulty. I waited until she turned her back to draw the curtains, then swiftly poured the tea into a heavy-duty plastic Ziploc bag I had hidden beneath the blankets. I scooped the oatmeal into a second bag, sealing them both tight. When Barbara turned back around, I was scraping the empty bowl, letting a drop of saliva slide down my chin to complete the pathetic picture. She patted my cheek, her eyes gleaming with absolute triumph, and took the empty tray away. I spent the rest of the day flushing the toxic sludge down the adjoining bathroom toilet, hiding the evidence of my survival. The true counteroffensive began at 2 a.m. The house was dead silent. I rose from the bed, my mind crystal clear for the first time in months. The thallium was slowly working its way out of my system, replaced by a razor-sharp calculating focus. I was a senior forensic accountant for the Department of Defense. I spent my days tracking phantom millions through the most complex, heavily fortified banking networks on the planet. Gavin was a local wealth manager who thought using a commercial VPN made him a ghost. He had severely underestimated his wife. I moved soundlessly up the stairs and slipped into his immaculate home office. The room smelled of his expensive cologne and expensive leather. I booted up his desktop computer. The login screen flashed, demanding a password. Gavin was an arrogant man, a creature of habit and hubris. I bypassed his standard user interface, entirely booting the machine from a hidden encrypted partition on a thumb drive Dr. Reed had provided me. Within 4 minutes, I had cracked his administrative firewall and bypassed his dual-factor authentication. I was inside the network. I began the financial autopsy. I followed the digital blood trail, tracing the routing numbers from our joint accounts, moving through his supposed corporate holding companies, and finally penetrating his personal offshore portfolios. What I found was a crater of financial ruins so massive it took my breath away. Gavin's image as a high-rolling, successful real estate mogul was a complete and utter fabrication. He did not own million-dollar portfolios. He owned millions in high-yield, toxic debt. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling ledger after ledger. Over the past 18 months, Gavin had hemorrhaged nearly $3 million in catastrophic cryptocurrency investments. To cover those initial losses, he had engaged in illegal, highly leveraged margin trading, borrowing heavily against assets he did not actually possess. When the market corrected, his positions collapsed. He was severely underwater. He owed money to aggressive private lenders, shadow institutions that did not send polite collection letters. The $500,000 home equity loan he had fraudulently taken out against my house was just a temporary bandage on a fatal wound. It had already been completely drained to pay off the interest on his margin calls. He was completely broke, cornered, and desperate. I downloaded every single ledger, every illegal wire transfer, every desperate email to his creditors, transferring the massive cache of data directly to my secure cloud server. I was building a federal indictment right from his own leather chair. Then, buried deep within a nested folder labeled Client Assets, I found a hidden directory with a different encryption standard. It was named simply Exit Strategy. My pulse pounded in my ears as I ran a decryption script against the folder. It took 90 seconds for the algorithm to chew through his weak security protocol. The folder popped open. The first file I clicked was a scanned PDF. It was a quitclaim deed for our Beacon Hill home, perfectly forged, transferring my absolute ownership entirely to Gavin. The signature was flawless. Alongside it were documents liquidating my retirement accounts and transferring my life insurance policies directly into his offshore trust. He had everything staged for the immediate aftermath of my death. He was going to use my corpse to balance his ledgers. But the financial documents were not the worst part. I clicked on the next subfolder, my eyes scanning a series of downloaded receipts and encrypted chat logs from a dark web marketplace. The receipts detailed the purchase of industrial-grade thallium. I looked at the shipping details and the IP addresses used to place the orders. Gavin had not used his own computer to buy the poison. He had not used his own network. He had bounced the signal and registered the delivery to an IP address located perfectly across town. He had logged the recipient name and the billing details under a specific independent commercial entity. I stared at the screen, the blood running completely cold in my veins. Gavin was not just murdering me for my money. He was framing Andre for my death. The IP address and the shipping manifest were perfectly tied to Andre's independent auditing firm. Gavin had carefully orchestrated the digital footprint to make it look like Andre, the despised working-class brother-in-law, had purchased the heavy metals. He was going to kill me, steal my entire net worth to pay off his illegal debts, and send an innocent man to federal prison to cover his tracks. I heard a sudden sharp creak from the floorboards out in the hallway. The sound was heavy and deliberate. Someone was awake. I instantly killed the computer screen, plunging the home office into absolute darkness. I dropped beneath the heavy mahogany desk, pressing my back against the cold wall. The brass handle on the office door began to turn slowly and silently, rotating downward. I held my breath, clutching the encrypted thumb drive in my hand, as the heavy wooden door pushed open, casting a long, terrifying shadow across the carpet. I lay perfectly still in the guest bedroom, letting the burner phone slip beneath my mattress. Upstairs, the heavy floorboards creaked as Gavin moved around the master suite, entirely confident that his captive wife was incapacitated. The manufactured exhaustion pulling at my limbs was profound, but the sheer adrenaline of Andre's note acted as a powerful counteragent. I waited for 2 agonizing hours until the house fell into absolute, undisturbed silence. Pushing the heavy quilt aside, I forced my trembling legs over the edge of the bed. I dressed very quickly in dark, loose sweatpants and a heavy winter coat. Using the burner phone, I accessed a ride-sharing application and requested a car to a street corner 3 blocks away, ensuring the engine noise would not echo up our driveway. The ETA was 10 minutes. I navigated the dark hallway, bypassing the creaky floorboards with practiced precision, and slipped into the freezing garage. I manually released the side door, stepping out into the biting winter air. The cold shocked my system, sharpening my fragmented thoughts. I practically dragged myself down the icy sidewalk, my muscles burning with uncharacteristic fatigue. When the heavy black sedan finally appeared, I climbed safely inside. The driver politely asked if I was heading to the local emergency room. I shook my head, instructing him to take the highway toward the regional military annex. Going to a civilian hospital was absolutely out of the question. Gavin was a highly connected, extremely wealthy financial manager who played golf with the hospital administrators. If my name flashed in a civilian database, he would be notified immediately. He would exploit his status as my emergency contact, intercept the blood tests, and legally commit me before dawn. I desperately needed a fortress where his money and influence were completely useless. As a senior forensic accountant handling highly classified budgets for the Department of Defense, my security clearance was formidable. We pulled up to the heavily fortified gates of the military medical annex. I rolled down the window, handing my federal identification badge to the armed sentry. He scanned the barcode, his posture straightening instantly as my clearance level flashed green on his screen. He immediately waved the vehicle through the barricades. I thanked the driver, stepped out into the secure compound, and walked directly toward the subterranean medical wing. The sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors were dead silent at this late hour. I approached the night duty station and specifically requested Dr. Nathaniel Reed. As the chief medical officer, he was intimately familiar with my file and strictly bound by absolute military confidentiality protocols. He emerged from his office 10 minutes later, his dark combat boots echoing sharply on the linoleum. He was a hardened veteran who possessed zero tolerance for bureaucratic nonsense. When he saw me shivering in a plastic chair, clutching my winter coat around my frail frame, his professional stoicism cracked. He immediately ushered me into a secure, windowless examination room, locking the heavy steel door firmly behind us. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I handed him the burner phone, displaying Andre's handwritten note. I watched Dr. Reed's jaw tighten as he read the chilling warning. I meticulously detailed every single physical symptom. I described the agonizing joint pain, the sudden and terrifying hair loss, the severe muscle tremors, the burning nausea, and the suffocating mental fog that descended every time Barbara forced me to consume her special meals and imported teas. Dr. Reed's expression grew dangerously dark. He did not casually suggest I was stressed. He did not ask if I was experiencing a bipolar episode. He immediately recognized the systematic destruction of a human body. He grabbed a tray of vials and tied a tourniquet around my bruised arm. "We are running this entirely off the grid," he stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion as he drew vial after vial of my blood. "Your husband will not find a single trace of this visit in any civilian database. I am processing a comprehensive heavy metals panel through our internal classified military laboratory. I will hide you in our secure officer housing until the results come back. You are not going back there again tonight." I spent the next 3 long days completely isolated on the base, drinking nothing but purified water and eating sealed military rations. Without Barbara's toxic meals, the heavy fog in my brain slowly began to lift, replaced by a cold, burning rage. The physical pain remained a dull ache radiating through my bones, but my mind was sharpening. I used the burner phone to coordinate silently with Andre, mapping out our exact next moves. On the morning of the 4th day, Dr. Reed walked into my temporary quarters holding a red-stamped file. His face was a mask of grim certainty. He sat down opposite me and placed the laboratory results on the metal table. "You are not crazy, Lauren," he said. "You are being murdered." He opened the file, pointing to a highlighted chemical marker. "You tested positive for massive lethal concentrations of thallium. It is a highly toxic, dangerous heavy metal. It is odorless, tasteless, and dissolves instantly in liquid. Your husband and mother-in-law have been microdosing you for months, building up the toxicity levels in your central nervous system to mimic the exact physical symptoms of a severe degenerative neurological disease. It was a meticulously planned, flawless execution. How much time did I have? I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. Dr. Reed closed the folder, his eyes locking onto mine with a chilling, absolute certainty. Given the saturation levels in your bone marrow, if you had stayed in that house and consumed their food for one more month, your weak heart would have completely stopped. You would have died of a seemingly natural cardiac arrest, and your husband would have inherited absolutely everything. But you survived, he added. Now we possess the medical evidence required to systematically dismantle his entire pathetic life. I pressed my spine into the solid wood of the desk, pulling my knees tightly to my chest. The heavy mahogany door creaked loudly on its hinges. A sliver of pale hall light sliced through the darkness, illuminating the expensive Persian rug just inches from my running shoes. I stopped breathing. The heavy, shuffling footsteps were unmistakable. It was Gavin. He muttered something incoherent, a groggy, heavy sound, and shuffled toward the leather recliner near the window. He bumped his shin against the side table, letting out a sharp, breathless curse. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering a frantic, deafening rhythm against my ribs. He was so close I could smell the stale bourbon radiating from his pores. He rummaged blindly through the top drawer of a filing cabinet, searching for something. A moment later, his hand brushed a loose phone charger. He grunted in satisfaction, grabbed the tangled white cord, and dragged his feet back toward the hallway. The door clicked shut, plunging the room back into pitch black. I waited 5 agonizing minutes, counting every erratic beat of my pulse before I dared to move. I crawled out from under the desk, my joints screaming in protest, and immediately reawakened the computer screen. I was not finished. I navigated back to the encrypted partition, reopening the folder chillingly titled Exit Strategy. I had already uncovered the forged quitclaim deed and the drained equity loans, but Gavin was a man who meticulously planned for absolutely every possible contingency. He would not stop at merely breaking even. He desperately wanted a massive payday to fund his arrogant lifestyle. I clicked on a subfolder disguised as a routine tax document. A dense 70-page PDF materialized on the screen. It was a newly minted life insurance policy, underwritten by a premier international firm notorious for asking minimal questions. I scrolled rapidly to the beneficiary designation. Gavin Reed was listed as the sole recipient. I scanned the coverage details, my blood freezing as the numbers crystallized. He had insured my life for $5 million. I moved to the payout clauses, reading the fine print with growing horror. The policy included a specific accelerated payout trigger for natural or medical death. It bypassed standard investigative waiting periods for diseases presenting clear neurological or cardiac failure. He and Barbara were not just slowly poisoning me to cover his massive financial crimes. They were cultivating a highly lucrative, perfectly legal execution. The thallium symptoms were designed to mimic a degenerative disease so flawlessly that a civilian coroner would sign off on a natural death without a second thought. Gavin would bury his wife, play the devastated widower, and walk away with $5 million of untraceable cash. A cold, lethal calm washed over me. The panic was gone, replaced by the precise, calculating efficiency of a senior forensic auditor. I inserted the encrypted hard drive Dr. Reed had provided into the hidden USB port beneath the monitor. I opened the root directory and initiated a mass transfer. I highlighted every single IP address from the dark web marketplace, every illegal transaction log from his offshore accounts, the forged deed signatures, and the $5 million life insurance policy. The progress bar appeared, a slow, agonizing crawl of green across the screen. While the massive data files downloaded, I pulled out the burner phone Andre had slipped into my pocket. I snapped high-resolution photographs of the most damning documents directly from the monitor, ensuring the timestamps and hidden account numbers were clearly visible. I opened a secure messaging application and selected the encrypted contact Andre had set up. I attached the images and typed a rapid message. The offshore accounts are a smokescreen for margin calls. He is $3 million in debt. I found a $5 million life insurance policy on me. They are framing you for the thallium purchase. The download is running. Get Vanessa out of the house now. I hit send. A single gray checkmark appeared, followed instantly by a second. Andre had read the message. The digital blood trail was secured off-site. I glanced back at the computer screen. The green progress bar was inching forward with agonizing slowness. 92%. 94%. The silence of the house felt heavy, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were waiting for me to make a fatal mistake. 96%. I kept my eyes locked on the glowing screen, silently willing the digital data to move faster. 98%. Suddenly, the distinct sound of a floorboard groaning echoed loudly from the top of the stairs. It was not Gavin's heavy, careless tread. These were extremely light, methodical footsteps. Barbara. She was awake. I watched the screen hit 99%. The estimated time remaining flashed at 5 seconds. The footsteps reached the landing, turning purposefully toward the staircase, leading down to the first floor. She was going to check on her patient. The progress bar hit 100%. A soft chime signaled the completion. I yanked the encrypted hard drive from the port, instantly killing the computer's power supply. I shoved the drive deep into the pocket of my sweatpants and sprinted for the door. I moved with silent desperation, sliding down the hallway just as Barbara's shadow stretched across the top of the stairs. I ducked into the dark stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time, completely ignoring the burning agony in my poisoned joints. I hit the first floor and practically dove toward the guest bedroom. I heard the unmistakable squeak of the kitchen door opening as she grabbed a fresh glass of water. I threw myself onto the couch, kicking off my sneakers and frantically pulling the heavy quilt up to my chin. I shoved the hard drive and the burner phone under the couch cushions, forced my breathing into a slow, shallow rhythm, and closed my eyes. A split second later, the brass handle on my bedroom door began to turn. Within 2 hours of Dr. Reed confirming the lethal levels of thallium in my entire system, the Department of Defense officially classified me as an active asset under direct threat. The military does not take assassination attempts on their senior forensic accountants lightly. I was transported via an unmarked tactical vehicle from the underground medical wing to a highly secure remote safe house located deep in the heavily forested outskirts of the city. The property was a nondescript isolated cabin surrounded by dense pine trees invisible from the main road and fortified with advanced surveillance systems. 2 armed military contractors were stationed discreetly at the perimeter. For the first time in months, I felt untouchable. The residual aches from the poison still radiated through my joints, a constant dull throb reminding me of the nightmare I had just escaped. But my mind was operating with a terrifying absolute precision. I sat at the heavy oak dining table in the center of the cabin, nursing a mug of purified water, staring at the encrypted laptop Dr. Reed had issued me. The digital trap was already being set, but I needed the final piece of the puzzle. I needed Andre. The heavy deadbolt on the front door clicked open precisely at midnight. I did not flinch. My military liaison had cleared the visitor. Andre stepped into the dimly lit cabin, shaking the freezing winter rain from his heavy dark wool coat. He looked completely exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes betraying weeks of severe sleep deprivation, but his jaw was set with a rigid, unbreakable determination. He locked the door behind him, dropping a massive leather briefcase onto the floor with a heavy thud. We stared at each other across the room for a long moment. There was no need for dramatic tears or frantic embraces. We were 2 analytical minds who had just survived the blast radius of a catastrophic familial betrayal. He pulled out a chair opposite me, his gaze dropping to the medical file resting near my laptop. I pushed it across the table toward him. He opened it, his eyes scanning the highlighted toxicology reports, detailing the heavy metal saturation in my bone marrow. His knuckles turned stark white as he gripped the edge of the folder. He closed his eyes, taking one long, ragged breath to compose himself before looking back up at me. "They really tried to murder you," Andre stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed in the quiet cabin. I nodded slowly. Gavin and Barbara poisoned me to cover his catastrophic margin calls and secure a $5 million life insurance payout. And they meticulously staged the digital footprint to frame you for purchasing the thallium on the dark web. Andre did not look surprised. In fact, a dark, cynical smile crept across his face as he reached down and unlatched his heavy leather briefcase. He pulled out two thick, incredibly dense binders, filled with highlighted bank statements, offshore routing logs, and complex corporate shell filings. "I have not exactly been sitting idle while my wife treated me like a disposable peasant," he replied smoothly. "I am an independent financial auditor, Lauren. I spend my life dismantling corporate fraud. Did they honestly believe they could run a massive laundering operation right under my nose without me noticing the discrepancies?" He pushed the first binder toward me. "For the past 6 months, I have been running a complete shadow audit on Gavin and Vanessa. They thought they were being exceptionally clever routing their toxic debt through a series of anonymous shell companies." I opened the binder, my eyes immediately locking onto the highlighted transaction ledgers. My pulse surged as I recognized the routing numbers. The sheer scale of the financial deception was staggering, but as I turned to the third page, my blood ran completely cold. The primary shell corporation used to funnel Gavin's stolen money and absorb his catastrophic cryptocurrency losses was not registered under a random corporate proxy. It was legally registered under Andre's independent auditing firm. I looked up at him in absolute shock. "Vanessa established these accounts using my personal credentials," Andre explained, his tone razor sharp. "My loving wife stole my social security number, forged my signature, and bypassed my digital authentication using a cloned SIM card. She has been systematically laundering Gavin's stolen money directly through my professional business accounts. If the Securities and Exchange Commission or the federal authorities ever caught on to Gavin's massive financial crater, the entire digital and paper trail would lead directly to my desk. They were not just going to frame me for your murder, Lauren. They were setting me up to be the absolute fall guy for a massive federal embezzlement and wire fraud syndicate. They were going to bury us both." I sat and stared at the pristine, undeniable evidence of their absolute treachery. The sheer arrogance of the Reed family was breathtaking. They viewed us as nothing more than disposable assets, pawns to be manipulated, drained, and sacrificed to protect their precious hollow legacy. They had severely underestimated their targets. I slid my encrypted laptop across the table, connecting it directly to Andre's massive cache of physical evidence. We placed the military toxicology reports, the dark web assassination receipts, the forged property deeds, and the fraudulent laundering ledgers side by side. We possessed a complete, airtight, and lethal federal indictment. "We are not just going to file for divorce," I stated, my voice echoing with a cold, terrifying finality. "I want to utterly obliterate them." Andre met my gaze, a brilliant, ruthless fire igniting in his tired eyes. "We will pull the trigger simultaneously," he agreed, leaning over the compiled evidence. "We freeze their assets, trigger the federal warrants, and initiate the corporate audits all at the exact same second. By the time the sun rises on Monday morning, the Reed family will be completely erased." We turned back to the screens, ready to execute our flawless strike. The sun broke over the heavily forested horizon, casting long shadows through the safe house windows. Andre and I sat among scattered financial ledgers, our alliance forged in absolute betrayal. We had the evidence, the motive, and the weapon to annihilate Gavin and Vanessa. But my husband was an animal backed into a corner, and cornered animals are notoriously unpredictable. Realizing he lost physical control over me, and that his attempts to force a medical conservatorship failed spectacularly against military protocols, Gavin pivoted his strategy with breathtaking speed. If he could not bury me in a psychiatric ward, he would bury me in the court of public opinion and starve me into submission. The first strike hit at precisely 8 in the morning. My secure laptop chimed with an automated alert from the family court system. Gavin filed an emergency petition for divorce and a restraining order. I opened the digital filing, reading his sworn affidavit with disgust and dark amusement. He painted a masterful, tragic picture. According to his sworn statement, I had suffered a severe psychotic break. He claimed I was in a fugue state, suffering paranoid delusions, and had violently abandoned our home in the middle of the night. He requested immediate exclusive control over our marital assets to prevent me from recklessly destroying our financial stability during my supposed mental collapse. I instantly logged into our banking portals to check the damage. The screens loaded, displaying a sea of zeros. Every joint checking and savings account had been completely drained. The high-yield investment portfolios were liquidated and the funds vanished. I checked my personal credit cards. Frozen, canceled, flagged for suspicious activity. Gavin was executing a classic financial starvation tactic. He wanted me panicked, penniless, and desperate. He wanted me crawling back, begging for access to my own money so he could trap me back inside his toxic web. He fundamentally forgot I was a forensic accountant for the Department of Defense. I did not need his compromised credit cards. I secured my untraceable operational funds weeks ago, safely hidden behind military encryption. But Gavin was not satisfied with merely taking the money. He wanted to destroy my credibility entirely. The phone buzzed violently on the oak table. He picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he read the screen. He turned the device toward me. Gavin had launched a highly coordinated smear campaign across every social media platform. There was a meticulously crafted post on his public profile. He played the devastated, terrified husband to absolute perfection. He wrote about his deep heartbreak, claiming he spent months desperately trying to get me psychiatric help. He described my disappearance as a tragic manifestation of severe mental illness, begging the community to pray for my return, while warning everyone I was highly unstable and prone to fabricating wild accusations. The comments section was a chorus of sympathy for the suffering widower in waiting. But he did not stop at social media. My burner phone, forwarding messages from my primary number, began exploding with notifications. Gavin was personally contacting distant family members, former college roommates, and casual acquaintances. He spun a narrative of a mentally unhinged, abusive wife who finally lost her grip on reality. He was systematically poisoning the well, ensuring that if I ever reached out for help, my words would be instantly dismissed as the paranoid ramblings of a sick woman. I watched the text messages roll in. Aunts and cousins I had not spoken to in years left frantic voicemails urging me to seek psychiatric treatment and return to my loving husband. They swallowed his lies completely. The sheer audacity of his performance was sickening. He used the very symptoms of the thallium poisoning he inflicted upon me as proof of my mental decline. Andre slammed his fist against the table, rattling the coffee mugs. "We have the military toxicology reports," he growled, his voice thick with anger. "We have the proof he poisoned you. We have the offshore accounts. Let me post the actual truth. Let me drop the bank ledgers in the middle of his pathetic comment section. We can destroy his narrative right now." I looked at the screen, watching the likes and sympathetic comments multiply by the second. A reckless part of me wanted to do exactly what Andre suggested. I wanted to scream the truth into the digital void. I wanted to publicly humiliate Gavin, rip off his mask, and expose the greedy monster hiding underneath. But I forced that urge down, locking it behind a wall of cold logic. Retaliating online was exactly what Gavin wanted. It would trigger a messy public screaming match. It would give him the opportunity to claim my posts were further proof of my paranoia. "We do absolutely nothing online," I stated, my voice calm and completely steady. "Let him talk. Let him gather sympathy. Let him paint himself as the perfect innocent victim. We will give him enough rope to hang himself permanently." Andre frowned, clearly frustrated by my restraint. "And how exactly do we do that?" "By letting him commit perjury," I replied, pointing to the divorce filing on my screen. To secure this asset freeze, Gavin must submit a sworn statement of financial disclosure to the family court by 5 this evening. He must legally declare every single asset, debt, and bank account under his control. He believes he is invincible. He believes his offshore accounts and illegal margin trading are completely invisible. A dangerous understanding dawned on his face. He is going to lie on the disclosure forms. He is going to lie under oath, I confirmed. He will hide the $3 million debt. He will hide the offshore assets. He will hide the forged life insurance policy. He will submit fraudulent documents directly to a federal judge. We will step back and let him do it. We will lay our legal landmines, wait for him to sign his name, and watch him step right onto them. I sat in the dim light of the secure military safe house, my heavy encrypted headset pressed tightly over my ears. The live audio feed hummed with the ambient background noise of a busy downtown espresso bar. Andre had positioned his burner phone perfectly on the small cafe table, transforming it into a hidden broadcasting device. He was waiting for Vanessa. Gavin's sister had frantically texted him all morning, demanding an urgent private meeting. She was completely unaware that Andre and I were already operating as a unified front from an undisclosed location. She still believed her husband was the oblivious, compliant auditor she had been manipulating for years. I listened to the sharp clinking of porcelain coffee cups, my pulse steady and completely cold. "Andre, thank God you are here." Vanessa's voice filtered through the earpiece. She sounded breathless, practically sobbing as she pulled out the metal chair across from him. Her performance was truly masterful. I could vividly picture her wiping away non-existent tears, playing the role of the devastated protective sister. "It is Gavin," she whimpered dramatically. "Lauren has completely lost her mind. She abandoned him, Andre. She is in some kind of severe psychotic state, and she managed to get her lawyers to freeze all of his accounts before she vanished into thin air. He has absolutely nothing left. He cannot even pay the retainers for his legal defense team." Andre's voice was remarkably flat. "What exactly do you need from me, Vanessa?" She sniffled a wet, pathetic sound. "I need you to endorse a massive bridge loan. Just $2 million. It is just temporary, just until Gavin can get a judge to overturn the asset freeze and get Lauren legally committed. My personal credit is tied up in the new house renovations, and your firm has perfect financial standing. Gavin will pay you back the second he gets access to his investment portfolios. Please, Andre, you are his brother by marriage. We are your family. You must help." "I am not endorsing a $2 million loan for Gavin." Andre stated, his tone entirely devoid of any warmth. The abrupt denial caused an immediate shift in the audio feed. The fake sniffling stopped instantly. "Excuse me?" Vanessa snapped, her voice dropping an octave, shedding the vulnerable victim persona entirely. "You are saying no, after absolutely everything my family has done for you." Andre remained silent, letting her hang herself with her own toxic entitlement. "Let me remind you of exactly who you are, Andre," she hissed, the ugly racist undertones of her true character bleeding through the transmission. "Before you married me, you were a nobody. You were just a scholarship kid from a rough, impoverished neighborhood with nothing but a cheap suit and a calculator. My family accepted you. We brought you into our elevated world. We gave you elite connections, high status, and credibility. My father introduced you to the wealthy corporate clients who built your precious little auditing firm. You owe us. You owe Gavin this money." I smiled in the dark isolation of the safe house. She was handing him the murder weapon on a silver platter. "I built my firm through relentless hard work, Vanessa," Andre replied smoothly. "And speaking of my independent firm, I was carefully reviewing our internal routing logs this morning. I found something incredibly fascinating hidden in the data." The silence from Vanessa's end of the feed was deafening. "I found a highly complex series of offshore shell companies illegally registered under my personal corporate tax identification number." Andre continued, his voice echoing with lethal precision. "I meticulously tracked the origin of the laundered funds. They lead directly back to Gavin's catastrophic cryptocurrency margins. You stole my authentication credentials, Vanessa. You used my name and my business to illegally launder your brother's stolen money. You attempted to set me up to take the ultimate fall for federal wire fraud." I do not know what you are talking about," Vanessa stammered, her voice suddenly trembling with very real panic. The distinct sound of heavy paper hitting the wooden cafe table echoed sharply through my headset. "I am not signing your loan," Andre stated, his voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. "But I did bring some very important documents for you to sign today." I heard the rustle of thick pages turning. "What is this?" Vanessa breathed, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "The first stack is our official divorce petition," Andre declared coldly. The second stack is a comprehensive forensic dossier detailing every single illegal wire transfer you executed using my stolen credentials. I have the exact IP addresses, the precise timestamps, and the forged digital signatures. I know you did it, Vanessa, and more importantly, the federal authorities will know you did it. Andre, please, she begged, the arrogant venom completely gone, replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. You cannot do this to me. We can fix this together. I am your wife. You were a parasite, he corrected. You and your brother thought you were the smartest people in the room. You thought you could treat people like disposable assets. You picked the wrong forensic accountant, and Gavin picked the wrong wife. I heard the loud scrape of a wooden chair against the floor as Andre stood up. Keep the dossier, Vanessa. Consider it a preview of your upcoming federal indictment. I suggest you use whatever cash you have left to hire a very good criminal defense attorney. You are going to need it. Andre disconnected the call, leaving Vanessa sitting alone in the coffee shop, staring at the absolute destruction of her life. He had executed his part of the trap flawlessly. The Shadow Alliance had struck its first fatal blow. Now it was my turn to finish Gavin off. I took a single deep, shuddering breath, pulling the heavy headset away from my ringing ears. The satisfaction was profound, washing over me in a glorious, triumphant wave of absolute vindication. Andre returned to the safe house shortly after, leaving Vanessa shattered in that downtown coffee shop. The heavy, reinforced door locked firmly behind him, sealing us inside our remote fortress of evidence. We spent the next 3 intense weeks operating in complete tactical stealth. My military liaison kept my physical location entirely off the civilian grid, while Andre and I meticulously organized the massive forensic dossiers. The family court finally issued the official summons for the preliminary asset division hearing. Gavin's legal team, funded entirely by high-interest credit he managed to scrounge from his remaining enablers, demanded an immediate in-person appearance. He wanted to parade his mentally broken wife before a federal judge to solidify his false narrative and seize permanent, uncontested control of our entire marital estate. Dr. Nathaniel Reed arrived at the safe house the exact moment the legal subpoena was delivered by a military courier. He dropped his heavy medical bag on the oak dining table, his face a mask of deep professional concern. He meticulously reviewed my latest blood panels, tapping his silver pen against the harsh fluorescent glow of his tablet screen. The heavy metal saturation in my bone marrow was slowly receding thanks to the rigorous military detox protocol, but the thallium had left severe, lingering neurological scarring. Dr. Reed explicitly forbade me from attending the hearing. He explained in clinical, terrifying detail that a high-stress environment would trigger a massive cortisol spike, which could easily cause a catastrophic neurological crash. My central nervous system was essentially a badly frayed wire. He warned me that the intense psychological pressure of a direct courtroom confrontation could induce violent seizures, permanent muscle paralysis, or even a sudden fatal cardiac event. I listened to his grim medical prognosis without breaking eye contact. I understood the severe physiological risks perfectly. But skipping the preliminary hearing meant allowing Gavin to stand before a federal judge and spin his toxic web of lies completely unchallenged. It meant hiding quietly behind my legal counsel while my husband played the sympathetic, long-suffering victim for the local media. I told Dr. Reed that absence was absolutely not an option. I needed Gavin to look me directly in the eye while he perjured himself on the public record. I needed to watch his arrogant smirk falter and die when he realized the vulnerable prey he thought he had flawlessly slaughtered was sitting directly across the aisle, holding the absolute, undeniable proof of his massive financial and physical crimes. Dr. Reed argued vehemently, citing his solemn oath as a military physician, but he fundamentally understood the cold, tactical necessity of my physical presence in that room. We negotiated a strict, non-negotiable compromise. He would attend the hearing as my officially designated medical proxy. He would remain on active standby directly outside the heavy oak courtroom doors, fully equipped with emergency chemical counter agents and a direct encrypted line to an airborne military medevac team. If my vitals crashed during the proceedings, He possessed the absolute legal authority to halt the hearing and pull me out immediately. I agreed to his strict terms, accepting the sleek biometric monitor he tightly strapped to my left wrist. The small black band would transmit my heart rate, oxygen levels, and blood pressure directly to his secure tablet in real time. The night before the hearing, the isolated cabin was suffocatingly quiet. Andre sat at the kitchen island under the dim pendant lights, methodically reviewing the final printed copies of Gavin's fraudulent financial disclosures. Gavin had formally sworn under penalty of perjury that our frozen joint accounts were his sole financial lifeline, deliberately omitting the $3 million margin deficit and the illegal offshore shell companies entirely. He had enthusiastically stepped right into the trap exactly as we anticipated. I retreated to my small bedroom to mentally prepare for the brutal war ahead. On the wooden nightstand sat the extensive array of heavy prescription medications Dr. Reed had prescribed to mask the agonizing physical symptoms of the advanced thallium poisoning. The pills kept the violent muscle tremors at bay, suppressed the blinding joint pain, and halted the terrifying rapid hair loss. I lingered quietly in the hallway for a brief moment, silently watching Andre work through the dense stacks of paper. He had sacrificed his own professional safety to help me dismantle this nightmare. The sheer volume of evidence we had compiled was overwhelming, representing months of Gavin's arrogant, unchecked criminality. We were no longer just fighting a bitter divorce battle, we were actively preparing to detonate a massive federal prosecution. Every single document, every traced wire transfer, and every forged signature had been painstakingly categorized and heavily encrypted. We had constructed a perfect, inescapable maze for my husband. Tomorrow morning, Gavin would walk confidently into that courtroom, completely blind to the fact that his entire privileged existence was about to violently collapse around him. I took a deep breath and finally stepped back into the shadows. I stood in the quiet darkness and stared intently at the glowing amber pill bottles. If I walked into that courtroom heavily medicated and functioning normally, Gavin's expensive lawyers would eagerly point to my polished appearance as definitive proof that my severe illness was entirely psychosomatic. He would expertly use my chemically forced composure to instantly validate his public narrative that I was merely a hysterical, bitter woman throwing a desperate tantrum for attention. I needed the presiding judge to see the absolute, undeniable truth of my condition. I needed the court to witness the raw devastation of a slow, calculated murder attempt. I reached out with a trembling hand and swept every single pill bottle into the top drawer of the nightstand, locking it with a sharp, echoing click. I purposely stopped taking the symptom-masking medication. The pain would be absolute agony, and the neurological risks were incredibly high, but the visual impact would be devastating. I wanted the judge to see exactly what Gavin's poison had done to my body. The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse loomed before me like the gates of purgatory. Every step across the polished marble floor sent a blinding white-hot shockwave of agony radiating up through my shins and into my spine. Stopping the symptom-masking medication 24 hours earlier had allowed the residual thallium to violently reassert its grip on my central nervous system. My joints felt like they were packed with crushed glass. A cold, clammy sweat coated my extremely pale skin, and the profound, suffocating mental fog I had fought so hard to escape was creeping back into the corners of my vision. Dr. Nathaniel Reed walked shoulder to shoulder with me, his hand hovering just inches from my elbow, his eyes scanning my pale face with deep clinical alarm. He stopped at the heavy double doors, tapping the biometric monitor strapped to my wrist, his gaze a silent warning. I gave him a barely perceptible nod, pushed the brass handle, and walked into the courtroom. Gavin was already seated at the petitioner's table. He wore his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his hair meticulously styled, exuding the calm, authoritative aura of a highly successful financial manager. When he turned and saw me shuffling down the aisle, his arrogant smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. I looked horrific. I was trembling visibly, my clothes hanging loosely over my rapidly deteriorating frame. clumps of my hair thinning under the harsh courtroom lights. But Gavin recovered instantly. His eyes widened in a practiced display of profound tragedy, and he leaned over to whisper something tragic to his expensive attorney. He was thrilled. My devastating physical condition was playing perfectly into his fabricated narrative. The presiding judge, a stern, sharp-eyed woman named Judge Davies, called the courtroom to order. Because Gavin had filed the emergency injunction to seize complete control of our marital estate, he was called to the stand first. He walked up to the witness box, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore a solemn oath to tell the absolute truth. The trap was officially primed. Under the gentle guiding questions of his attorney, Gavin delivered an Oscar-worthy performance. He choked back tears, his voice cracking as he described his deep, unwavering love for me. He painted a masterful portrait of a devoted husband watching his beloved wife descend into severe paranoid psychosis. He testified that my sudden disappearance was a violent, manic episode, a complete detachment from reality. When his attorney asked about his financial disclosure forms, Gavin sat up straight, projecting complete transparency. He stated clearly under penalty of perjury that our joint accounts were his only financial lifeline. He declared he possessed 0 outstanding debts. When asked why he needed immediate exclusive control over all our liquidated assets, he looked at the judge with a tearful, pleading expression. He claimed he desperately needed the funds to secure a room for me in a specialized locked psychiatric care facility. He swore he only wanted the money to pay for my lifelong medical care. My attorney, a ruthless, brilliant litigator named Ms. Sterling, stood up for the cross-examination. She did not bring a single piece of paper to the podium. She simply locked her eyes on Gavin and began laying the invisible tripwires. She started with his finances. She asked him directly if he held any offshore accounts, specifically naming the corporate tax identification numbers associated with Andre's firm. Gavin laughed dismissively, swearing under oath he had no such accounts. Ms. Sterling smoothly pivoted, asking if he was carrying any severe margin deficits, specifically a $3 million cryptocurrency debt. Gavin looked slightly annoyed, declaring the accusation absurd and completely false on the official court record. Ms. Sterling did not miss a beat. She asked about his recent insurance purchases. She inquired if he had underwritten a $5 million accelerated payout policy on my life, specifically containing clauses for degenerative neurological death. Gavin's left eye twitched a minuscule crack in his perfect facade, but his arrogance pushed him forward. He vehemently denied the existence of any such policy, stating under oath that his financial disclosures were comprehensive and entirely accurate. He was lying directly to a federal judge, digging his own grave with every syllable. Finally, Ms. Sterling shifted her focus to my physical deterioration. She asked Gavin about my diet leading up to my disappearance. She asked about the specialized meals and the imported teas his mother Barbara had been preparing for me. Gavin leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. He testified that his mother was a saint who had moved into our home solely to care for her ailing, mentally unstable daughter-in-law. He swore under oath that Barbara's meals were organic, lovingly prepared, and free of any harmful substances. He looked directly at me with a sneer of pure contempt, stating on the record that my physical symptoms were entirely psychosomatic, a desperate, hysterical manifestation of my severe mental illness. The perjury was absolute, comprehensive, and permanently recorded on the official court transcript. Ms. Sterling thanked him and returned to her seat. The judge looked down from the bench, her expression unreadable, and called me to the witness stand. The walk from my table to the witness box felt like a grueling, impossible marathon. My legs trembled violently with every step, the muscle spasms radiating through my hips. The room began to swim, a heavy, suffocating darkness pressing against the edges of my vision. I grabbed the railing of the witness stand to steady myself, my knuckles turning white as I lowered my frail body into the leather chair. A cold sweat dripped down the back of my neck. The profound, manufactured exhaustion pulled at my limbs, dragging me down into an abyss of physical failure. As I raised my shaking right hand to swear my oath, My eyes locked onto Gavin's smug, triumphant face across the room, and the timeline caught up to the chilling, paralyzing reality of the first night. The agonizing fire in my nervous system reached a terrifying crescendo. I gripped the wooden rail of the witness box, my knuckles completely devoid of color as the courtroom spun around me. Through the suffocating fog encroaching on my peripheral vision, I locked eyes with my husband. Gavin sat straight at the petitioner table, radiating complete confidence. He wore the exact same cold, condescending smirk he had displayed the morning he handed me the poisoned cup of herbal tea. He thought he had won. He believed my trembling frame was the absolute proof of his fabricated narrative. From the crowded wooden benches of the public gallery, a sharp, grating voice shattered the heavy silence. Barbara leapt to her feet, her manicured finger pointing directly at my shaking body. "She is faking it," my mother-in-law shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Look at her. It is just another one of her pathetic, hysterical tantrums. She just wants attention, because Gavin finally exposed her lies." Judge Davies slammed her wooden gavel against the sounding block, demanding immediate order. But the crack sounded like a distant gunshot beneath the roaring ocean in my ears. I tried to speak to articulate my name for the official court record, but my vocal cords were completely paralyzed. The raw thallium coursing freely through my veins without the chemical mask finally triggered the inevitable neurological crash. My legs, stripped of all muscular control, simply ceased to exist beneath me. I pitched forward, collapsing out of the heavy leather witness chair. The hard oak floor rushed up to meet me, and the impact knocked the remaining air from my burning lungs. I lay twisted on the polished wood, my body seized by violent, uncontrollable muscle tremors. The courtroom instantly erupted into pandemonium. Shouts echoed from the gallery. The bailiffs sprinted down the central aisle, their boots thudding against the floorboards. Through my dark haze, I saw Gavin leap up from his table. He launched into his performance of the terrified, devoted husband. He rushed toward the witness stand, falling beside me with horror plastered across his face. He reached his hands out, crying my name, begging the bailiffs to help his wife. It was sickening. Even as my heart rate plummeted and my lungs fought for oxygen, I could see the cold, calculating glint of victory shining in his eyes. Then the double doors at the back of the courtroom blasted open. The crash silenced the room instantly. Dr. Nathaniel Reed strode down the center aisle, moving with the unstoppable momentum of a military strike force. He did not ask for permission to enter the restricted zone. He bypassed the wooden gate entirely, vaulting it with his trauma bag swinging in his grip. "Back away from her right now," Dr. Reed barked, his military cadence cutting through the civilian chaos like a serrated blade. Gavin stood up, attempting to use his authority to block the physician. "Who the hell are you? I am her husband. She is having a psychotic break. Security, remove this man immediately." Dr. Reed did not slow down. He shoved his shoulder hard into Gavin's chest, knocking my husband backward into the petitioner table. "I am a federal medical officer operating under emergency military protocol," Dr. Reed roared, dropping to his knees beside my convulsing body. "If you touch her again, I will have you arrested for obstructing a federal medical evacuation. Bailiff, initiate a priority 911 dispatch immediately. Tell them we have a critical heavy metal poisoning with active neurological failure. I need a clear perimeter now." Gavin stood frozen, his composure shattering into jagged pieces. The word poisoning hung in the sterile courtroom air, heavy and lethal. The judge stood up behind her bench, her eyes wide with shock. Dr. Reed ripped open his trauma bag, ignoring my husband. He pulled out a syringe of chemical counteragents, plunging it directly into my thigh to stabilize my crashing heart rate. He checked the biometric monitor strapped to my wrist, his face a mask of concentration. The tremors shaking my limbs slowly began to subside as the emergency medication flooded my system, fighting back the thallium. I could not move my body, but my vision cleared just enough to watch the utter destruction of Gavin's reality. Paramedics burst through the courtroom doors seconds later, rolling a stretcher down the aisle. The room remained trapped in silence as the highly trained medical team swiftly transferred my limp body onto the gurney. Gavin tried to step forward again, attempting to play the desperate spouse, but a bailiff stepped into his path, placing a firm hand on his chest. "You cannot take her!" Gavin shouted, absolute panic finally bleeding into his voice. "I have medical power of attorney. She belongs in a psychiatric facility." "She belongs in a military hospital," Dr. Reed stated coldly, standing up to his height. He turned his back on Gavin, dismissing him completely, and marched directly up to the bench. Judge Davies leaned forward, her heavy gavel gripped in her hand. "Sir, I demand an immediate explanation for this unprecedented disruption of my courtroom. You cannot remove a witness in the middle of a hearing." Dr. Reed reached inside his suit jacket. He pulled out a very thick, heavy manila folder. Across the front cover, stamped in bold, unmissable red ink, were the words, "Classified Military Toxicology Report." He slammed the file directly onto the wood of the bench. The sound echoed like a final verdict. "That is the comprehensive blood panel and forensic analysis of the woman you just saw collapse," Dr. Reed declared, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "Lauren is not suffering from a psychotic break, Your Honor. She is currently dying from acute deliberate heavy metal poisoning, and the man sitting at the petitioner table is the one murdering her." The courtroom walls absorbed the silence following Dr. Nathaniel Reed's devastating declaration. The accusation of attempted murder paralyzed everyone in the gallery. Paramedics continued their synchronized movements, securing my convulsing body to the stretcher. But the true epicenter shifted to the mahogany bench. Judge Davies stared at the classified military folder resting ominously on her desk. The red Department of Defense seal was impossible to ignore. She looked down at Gavin, her judicial instincts registering the sudden absence of his practiced grief. He stood rigid, his face completely drained of color. Judge Davies broke the wax seal on the folder. The sharp tear of heavy paper echoed through the cavernous room. She flipped open the cover, scanning the dense medical data, blood toxicity charts, and stamped military affidavits. Her expression, normally a mask of impenetrable legal neutrality, contorted into pure horror. She looked up, her gaze locking onto Dr. Reed with profound respect. "Doctor," she stated, her voice tight and trembling with suppressed rage, "you are presenting official federal documentation claiming the petitioner actively poisoned the respondent. I need you to explain exactly what I am looking at right now." Dr. Reed stood tall, his military bearing projecting unshakable authority. "You are looking at a comprehensive forensic toxicology report, Your Honor," he declared. "For the past 3 weeks, Lauren has been under highly classified military medical supervision. We conducted an extensive panel of heavy metal toxicity screenings. The results are conclusive and terrifying. Lauren is suffering from acute advanced thallium poisoning. Thallium is a restricted, tasteless, odorless, colorless heavy metal. It is known as the poisoner's poison because its horrific symptoms perfectly mimic severe, naturally occurring neurological and psychiatric diseases." Gavin took a sudden step backward, bumping hard into his heavy leather chair. "This is completely insane," he shouted, his voice cracking with a high, desperate pitch. "She is crazy. You are all crazy. I never gave her anything." "Silence!" Judge Davies roared, slamming her wooden gavel down with ferocious force. "If you open your mouth again, Mr. Sterling, I will hold you in immediate criminal contempt and have you thrown in a holding cell. Continue, Doctor." "Thallium requires deliberate, calculated, and sustained dosing, Your Honor," Dr. Reed continued smoothly. "If you turn to page 4 of the military report, you will see the exact timeline of the toxic accumulation in Lauren's central nervous system. The heavy metal saturation did not begin randomly. The biological timeline of her physical and mental deterioration perfectly matches a highly specific date. The poisoning commenced exactly 48 hours after Gavin's mother, Barbara Sterling, moved into the marital home under the guise of providing support." A horrified gasp rippled through the crowded gallery. On the wooden benches, Barbara leaped to her feet, her face twisting into a mask of pure, vicious panic. "That is an absolute lie," she shrieked, waving wildly in the air. "I made her healthy teas. I cooked her organic meals. I was trying to heal her." Dr. Reed turned his head slowly, locking his cold, clinical gaze directly onto Barbara. "Yes, the herbal teas," he stated, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. "That brings us to the forensic payload of this investigation. When Lauren managed to escape the house, she possessed the foresight to secure the physical evidence of her own murder. She brought the remaining bottles of your brewed tea directly to our military facility. Gavin's knees finally buckled. He collapsed heavily into his chair, his styled hair matted with cold sweat. The arrogant smirk he had worn since the beginning of this ordeal was entirely wiped from his face, replaced by the hollow, vacant stare of a man staring directly into the abyss. My team did not just run a chemical analysis on the liquid inside those bottles, Dr. Reed explained, turning back to the judge. We handed the containers over to the Department of Defense Forensic Investigation Unit. They ran a microscopic fingerprint analysis on the glass, the caps, and the storage containers. They isolated the prints and ran them through the federal database. The results are completely undeniable. The only fingerprints found on the poisoned vials belong exclusively to two people. Dr. Reed paused, letting the heavy weight of the impending revelation press down on the room. He pointed a steady accusatory finger directly at the petitioner's table. The fingerprints belong exclusively to Barbara Sterling, who physically brewed the toxic tea, and Gavin Sterling, who facilitated the daily dosing. They worked together in a premeditated conspiracy to slowly murder Lauren, inherit her military operational funds, and legally claim her entire estate by framing her physical death as a tragic psychiatric suicide. "It is a setup!" Barbara screamed, her voice tearing into a hysterical shriek. She lunged forward, trying to push past the heavy wooden barrier, but two armed court bailiffs grabbed her arms, pinning her firmly against the swinging gate. "She planted those bottles. She is trying to frame us. Gavin, do something. Tell them she is lying." But Gavin could not speak. He sat frozen in his leather chair, his jaw hanging open, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. He was completely paralyzed by the sudden, violent destruction of his master plan. He had walked into this courthouse expecting to secure total financial domination and finalize my institutionalization. Instead, he was sitting trapped in a locked room surrounded by armed federal officers, listening to a military doctor dismantle his life. Judge Davies slowly lowered the classified military file back onto her desk. Her face was a portrait of cold, furious judicial wrath. She had presided over thousands of bitter divorces, but she suddenly realized she had been manipulated into facilitating a slow execution. She looked down at the paramedics, who had stabilized my violent tremors and were rapidly wheeling my stretcher toward the heavy exit doors. She turned her burning, relentless gaze toward Gavin and Barbara. The atmosphere shifted from chaotic panic to an icy, terrifying anticipation. The trap had been flawlessly sprung, the jaws snapping shut. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut, sealing out the flashing red lights of the ambulance bay. I was gone, secured in the back of a military transport, but the trap I had meticulously built remained fully active. Inside the courtroom, the suffocating silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds before Gavin frantically scrambled to salvage his disintegrating reality. He slammed his palms onto the petitioner table, his charcoal suit suddenly looking disheveled and cheap under the harsh fluorescent lights. He shouted that the military report was a complete fabrication, a stunt orchestrated by an unstable woman. He demanded the proceedings continue without delay, insisting his emergency injunction be granted immediately so he could take total control of the marital estate to pay for his extreme emotional distress. He was flailing his voice, cracking with panic, desperately trying to construct a lifeline out of thin air, while his mother hyperventilated against the wooden barrier. Ms. Sterling did not wait for the judge to reprimand him. She stepped up to the wooden podium, her posture radiating absolute lethal calm. She stated that since the petitioner had explicitly opened the door regarding his financial transparency, the defense was legally entitled to present a rebuttal witness. Gavin's expensive attorney immediately jumped up aggressively, objecting frantically, claiming no further witnesses were listed on the docket and that this was a procedural ambush. Ms. Sterling smiled a sharp, predatory expression and reminded the court that emergency hearings involving newly discovered massive financial fraud allowed for immediate expert testimony. Judge Davies, her eyes still burning from the toxicology report, fiercely overruled the objection. She commanded Ms. Sterling to call her witness without another word of delay. Ms. Sterling turned slightly toward the gallery and called Andre to the stand. Gavin recoiled, his spine slamming against his chair. His eyes bulged as the heavy courtroom doors opened once again. Andre strode down the center aisle. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit and silk tie, exuding the cold, intimidating aura of a corporate assassin. He carried a thick black leather briefcase in his right hand. Gavin stared in absolute horror, his mouth hanging open. This was the man he had trusted to hide his illicit funds, the man he believed was a compliant pawn in his tax schemes. Andre did not even glance at Gavin. He walked directly to the witness box, placed his hand firmly on the Bible, and swore the solemn oath to tell the whole truth. When asked to state his profession for the record, Andre leaned into the microphone. He declared himself a certified forensic financial auditor, independently contracted by Ms. Sterling 6 weeks prior to systematically dismantle the petitioner's fraudulent financial empire. Gavin let out a strangled gasp. His attorney desperately tried to object again, grasping at straws, but Judge Davies slammed her gavel, threatening to hold the defense counsel in immediate criminal contempt if he interrupted the testimony one more time. Under Ms. Sterling's precise surgical questioning, Andre opened his black briefcase and retrieved a heavy stack of certified bank-stamped financial dossiers. He did not speak in vague generalities. He used exact calendar dates, routing numbers, and secure IP addresses. He methodically destroyed Gavin's entire facade. Andre presented irrefutable proof that Gavin had secretly taken out a massive secondary mortgage on our primary residence. He submitted the original loan documents to the court, highlighting the forged signature on the bottom line. Andre expertly explained how Gavin had bypassed the strict notary requirements by using a fraudulent digital seal purchased on the dark web. He then traced the stolen equity, mapping exactly how Gavin funneled the illicit cash through a complex series of shell companies directly into unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchanges. Andre placed the final damning ledger on the bench, revealing a catastrophic margin call. Gavin had entirely liquidated his stolen funds and lost over $3 million in high-risk crypto trades. He was now entirely bankrupt. Gavin was trembling violently now, his hands gripping his meticulously styled hair, completely trapped in the terrifying nightmare of his own making. But Andre was not finished. Ms. Sterling asked the auditor to address the petitioner's earlier claims regarding his lack of insurance policies. Andre pulled out a multi-page insurance contract adorned with a corporate logo. He submitted it directly to Judge Davies. It was a $5 million accelerated payout life insurance policy, taken out exclusively on my life. Andre pointed out the terrifying specifics hidden deep within the underwriter's clauses. The policy carried a highly unusual premium multiplier, specifically designed to bypass the standard waiting period for payouts related to sudden degenerative neurological death and obscure heavy metal toxicity. The courtroom erupted in shocked, disgusted murmurs. Andre then read the timestamp on the digital signature aloud for the official record. Gavin had finalized and funded the massive death benefit exactly 2 days before Barbara moved her suitcases into our home. Ms. Sterling then directed Andre to compare these certified documents to the financial disclosure forms Gavin had submitted to the court that very morning. Andre confirmed that none of these massive debts, hidden offshore accounts, or multi-million-dollar life insurance policies were listed. He formally submitted the forensic audit into evidence, definitively proving that Gavin had committed blatant, calculated perjury just 30 minutes prior when he swore under oath that he had no outstanding liabilities and only wanted to protect his sick wife. Judge Davies' face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. She slammed her gavel down with such ferocity that the wooden block cracked. She stared directly at Gavin, her voice echoing with absolute, terrifying authority. She declared she had never witnessed such a repulsive, sociopathic display of arrogance and criminal deceit in her entire judicial career. She had been sitting on the bench presiding over an active, premeditated attempted murder disguised as a tragic divorce. She ordered the armed bailiffs to immediately lock down the courtroom and secure both Gavin and Barbara, permanently turning the emergency civil hearing into an active federal crime scene. The heavy click of the bailiff's radio shattered the frozen tableau. "We need immediate federal transport units," the officer barked into his shoulder microphone, unholstering his steel handcuffs. Gavin stared at the approaching armed officers, his chest rising and falling in violent jerks. The realization of his absolute destruction finally breached his narcissistic armor. There was no charm offensive left to deploy. There were no offshore accounts to flee to. The millions he had stolen were gone, incinerated in margin calls, and the military-grade forensic evidence of his murderous conspiracy was permanently logged on the federal record. He was completely trapped. The polished marble floor beneath his expensive custom Italian leather shoes was about to be permanently replaced by the cold, damp concrete of a maximum security federal penitentiary. As the lead bailiff physically grabbed Gavin's bicep to secure him, survival instinct overrode every ounce of familial loyalty. Gavin violently twisted his shoulder away from the officer, his eyes wide as he pointed a shaking accusatory finger directly at the woman standing beside him. "It was her!" Gavin screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "I did not try to kill anyone. It was my mother. She bought the thallium. She put it in Lauren's food. I just wanted the money from the estate. I never wanted anyone to die." He was sobbing now, a grown man throwing his own mother into the fire to save his own skin. "Check her bank accounts. She brewed those herbal teas every single morning. I am just a financial manager. She is the murderer, not me." The betrayal hung in the air, raw and repulsive. Barbara stood paralyzed, staring at the golden boy she had idolized, protected and conspired with her entire life. Her face flushed a dangerous purple. The shock of his instant treason morphed into pure, unrestrained rage. "You ungrateful, pathetic little coward!" Barbara shrieked. She lunged past the heavy wooden partition, entirely ignoring the armed officers closing in. She raised her hand and delivered a vicious slap directly across Gavin's face. The sharp crack of her palm striking his cheek echoed like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. Gavin stumbled backward, clutching his face, but Barbara did not stop. She grabbed the lapels of his expensive charcoal suit, shaking him violently, screaming that he was a weak fool who had ruined everything. She clawed at his chest, completely losing her mind in a frenzy of anger. The two bailiffs immediately abandoned their verbal warnings. They surged forward, tackling both mother and son simultaneously. The heavy thud of bodies hitting the polished oak floor shook the petitioner's table. Barbara kicked and shrieked like a wild animal while Gavin whimpered beneath the crushing weight of a federal officer's knee, pressing brutally into his spine. The metallic ratcheting of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around their wrists finalized their spectacular downfall. Judge Davies did not flinch at the violent spectacle unfolding beneath her bench. She stood up, radiating absolute disgust. She gripped her wooden gavel and brought it down with a deafening crack that cut through Barbara's screaming. "Gavin and Barbara Sterling, you are both hereby remanded into immediate federal custody without the possibility of bail," Judge Davies commanded, her voice ringing out with lethal finality. "You will be transferred to the federal holding facility to await formal indictment for premeditated attempted murder, massive wire fraud, felony perjury, and conspiracy. Furthermore, based on the irrefutable forensic and financial evidence presented in this court today, I am issuing an immediate binding executive order regarding the marital estate." She looked down at Gavin, who was now being hauled to his feet by two bailiffs, his hands pinned behind his back. "I am stripping you of all marital assets, Mr. Sterling. I am nullifying your fraudulent power of attorney. I award 100% of all remaining domestic and liquidated assets, properties, and accounts entirely to Lauren. You leave this courtroom with absolutely nothing." In the second row of the public gallery, Vanessa sat frozen in her wooden pew. She watched through wide, terrified eyes as her brother and mother were forcefully dragged down the center aisle in steel chains. The lavish lifestyle she had been enjoying, completely subsidized by Gavin's stolen offshore funds, evaporated in a matter of seconds. Her own husband had recently filed for a brutal divorce upon discovering her involvement in Gavin's shady financial dealings, leaving her entirely dependent on this fabricated inheritance. Now she was absolutely broke, facing a devastating divorce of her own, and permanently tied to a family of heavily documented, newly minted felons. Panic gripped her throat. She desperately needed a lifeline. She saw Andre, the forensic auditor, calmly packing his devastating financial dossiers into his black briefcase at the defense table. Vanessa scrambled out of her seat, pushing frantically past the stunned spectators, and intercepted him just as he latched his briefcase. "Andre, please," she begged, her voice trembling with intense desperation as she grabbed the sleeve of his tailored navy suit. "You know how Gavin operates. I had no idea about the poisoning. I have no money left. All the accounts are frozen. Please, you have to help me figure out a legal defense before they come after me too." Andre stopped. He slowly turned his head, his cold, calculating eyes scanning her desperate, tear-stained face. He reached down and firmly detached her gripping fingers from his expensive fabric. "I am a forensic auditor, Vanessa, not a miracle worker," Andre stated, his voice devoid of a single ounce of pity. "Your family is financially and legally radioactive, and I highly suggest you hire a very cheap public defender." Without another word, he adjusted his silk tie, turned his back on her, and walked confidently out of the heavy oak doors, leaving her standing entirely alone in the cold, empty, and silent ruins of her family's completely destroyed empire. As the flashing red lights of the waiting police cruisers illuminated the stained glass windows above the bench, 6 months after the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse slammed shut on the Sterling family empire, the dust finally settled into a permanent, undeniable reality. The swift and brutal machinery of the federal justice system had processed Gavin and Barbara with merciless efficiency. There were no plea deals offered, and no leniency granted. The mountain of forensic evidence, combined with Andre's meticulous financial audit and their own spectacular courtroom implosion, left them entirely defenseless. Last Tuesday, the presiding judge handed down their official sentences. Gavin and Barbara Sterling were each condemned to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. They were convicted of premeditated attempted murder, massive wire fraud, and severe conspiracy charges. The Golden Boy and his fiercely devoted mother were now nothing more than federal inmates, stripped of their designer clothes, their stolen wealth, and their pathetic, arrogant delusions. They traded their organic imported tees and tailored suits for standard-issue jumpsuits and freezing steel bars. Vanessa experienced a different yet equally devastating kind of imprisonment. Stripped of her unearned luxury and entirely cut off from Gavin's illicit financial pipeline, her manufactured lifestyle collapsed overnight. Her husband finalized their aggressive divorce, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of her own complicity. Today, Vanessa works a grueling minimum wage job at a discount retail outlet on the outskirts of the city. She spends her days standing on her feet for 9 hours straight, folding cheap synthetic sweaters and enduring the complaints of impatient customers. There are no more spontaneous weekend trips to European resorts or lavish spa days funded by stolen military operational accounts. Her perfectly manicured hands are now calloused from breaking down cardboard boxes in a dusty stockroom. The suffocating arrogance she once weaponized against me has been entirely replaced by the exhausting, humiliating reality of surviving paycheck to paycheck. She is tethered to a family of heavily documented, globally disgraced felons, rendering her a permanent outcast in the elite social circles she once fought so desperately to dominate. Conversely, Andre utilized the explosive trial as a masterclass in professional liberation. By voluntarily turning over the catastrophic forensic audit and testifying as a key expert witness, he completely insulated himself from Gavin's criminal fallout. He walked out of that courtroom and never looked back. Free from the Sterling family's toxic systemic racism and endless financial abuse, Andre successfully launched his own elite private auditing firm. His reputation as a ruthless, unimpeachable financial investigator skyrocketed after the trial transcripts became public record. High-profile corporate clients now pay premium retainers for his unparalleled expertise in uncovering hidden assets and dismantling complex fraud networks. He operates from a stunning modern office downtown, surrounded by a team of brilliant analysts who respect him deeply. He took the very tools Gavin tried to use to subjugate him and forged an absolute empire of his own. As for me, the transformation over the last 6 months has been nothing short of a total physical and professional resurrection. My body finally purged of the lethal thallium that had been slowly destroying my central nervous system, healed with miraculous speed. The terrifying tremors that once seized my limbs completely vanished. The suffocating mental fog lifted, restoring my sharp analytical focus. My hair has grown back thick and full, and my extremely pale, clammy skin has been replaced by a healthy, vibrant complexion. I look sharper and more powerful than I ever did before Barbara brought her poison tea into my home. The Department of Defense recognized the extraordinary resilience and tactical brilliance it took to outmaneuver a highly sophisticated murder plot while maintaining operational security. Last week, I received my official highly classified promotion. I am now the lead director of strategic operations at my defense firm. I command a massive division of intelligence analysts overseeing global security initiatives with an iron grip. The military funds Gavin tried so desperately to steal are now entirely under my unassailable control, multiplied by a significant executive salary increase. The marital estate awarded 100% to me by the federal judge is completely liquidated, reorganized, and fortified. I stand tonight on the expansive glass balcony of my beautiful, fully paid-off penthouse overlooking the harbor. The evening air is crisp and clean, carrying the faint, soothing scent of the ocean. I hold a glass of expensive red wine in my left hand, feeling the solid, grounding reality of the life I clawed back from the edge of death. In my right hand, I hold a flimsy, cheap envelope stamped with the seal of the federal penitentiary system. The letter arrived this afternoon via certified mail. It is from Gavin. Across 3 pages of frantic, heavily cramped handwriting, my disgraced former husband begs me for forgiveness. He claims the harsh prison food is making him violently ill and pleads with me to deposit money directly into his commissary account. He writes that he is terrified, completely alone, and desperate for a reliable lifeline. He promises he still loves me deeply. I do not feel any lingering anger, and I certainly do not feel any useless pity. I feel only an absolute profound emptiness toward the weak man who tried to end my existence. I step back inside my pristine living room and walk slowly over to the heavy-duty paper shredder, resting quietly beside my solid mahogany desk. I do not bother opening the sealed envelope. I simply press the power button, feed the entire letter into the grinding steel teeth, and watch his desperate words turn into meaningless confetti. Returning to the wide balcony, I take a slow, deep, restorative breath and look out at the magnificent sunset painting the endless sky in brilliant, fiery shades of gold and crimson. The toxic heavy metal did not successfully break my spirit. The cruel, calculated deception did not permanently blind me. I did not merely just survive the deadly poison, I became the permanent antidote.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river. Years slipped slowly out to sea, but no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain through every triumph